Back in 2016, I was 29 and feeling burned out. I had been working in a small auto shop just outside Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Long hours, bad pay, and even worse sleep. I needed a break from the noise, from people, from everything. I didn't have money for fancy vacations or hotels, but I'd grown up camping with my dad and had enough gear stored in the garage to make it work. One weekend in late September, I decided to head out for a solo camping trip. I didn't want to go to a regular campground. I didn't want neighbors or trail signs or fees. I wanted real quiet. I remembered this area out west near Punxsutawney. Flat land, scattered woods, a lot of old farms with wide open fields. My dad and I had driven past it years ago. I figured I could find some patch of land far enough off the main roads, pitch a tent, and enjoy some space. I left early Friday morning and drove for almost 3 hours, stopping only once for gas and snacks. I turned off the main highway, then followed a series of back roads that narrowed from asphalt to cracked pavement to gravel. Eventually, I found what looked like the right kind of place. A long stretch of land, mostly fields, backed up against a wooded slope. There was an old wire fence on one side, a rusty mailbox with no numbers, and a dirt path leading inward. I slowed down, looked both ways, no cars in sight, and turned down the path. There was no sign saying no trespassing. That made me feel better. I figured maybe it was just old farmland nobody was using anymore. The path led me through waist-high grass and past a small grove of trees. I drove until the trail narrowed too much for my car to continue, maybe a quarter mile in. I parked, grabbed my pack, and walked the rest of the way on foot. The place was quiet in a way I hadn't heard in years. Not silent. There were bugs, a few distant bird calls, and the low rustling of the grass, but peaceful. No hum of traffic, no shouting, no ringing phones. Just space. I found a spot near the back end of the property, close to the woods but still in the open. There were no buildings in sight except what looked like an old barn maybe half a mile down a hill in the far corner. It was small, gray, leaning slightly, but didn't look like it was falling apart completely. I figured I could check it out later. I pitched my tent by a shallow ditch, not too close to the trees, laid out my gear, and cracked open a cheap beer. The sun was still up, and the whole field was lit gold. I didn't see a single person or animal. For a while, it felt perfect. That first night was mostly calm. I made a fire using a little portable pit I brought, roasted some hot dogs, and sat back with a small radio that barely picked up anything. Around 10, it got dark fast. I zipped up the tent and stretched out in my sleeping bag, the cool air settling over everything. But I didn't sleep that well. It wasn't the cold or the usual discomfort of sleeping on the ground. It was something else. Around midnight, I started hearing sounds, soft, repetitive ones. I told myself it was probably animals, but it didn't feel right. Every so often, I'd hear a thud. Not sharp, not fast, like something heavy being dropped on the ground far away. A soft, distant sound came maybe 4 or 5 times in total, always with a gap in between, like someone dropping something, walking off and coming back. I didn't get up to check. I stayed in the tent and held still. It wasn't fear exactly, more like unease, like my body knew something my brain hadn't worked out yet. I kept telling myself it was nothing. Maybe an animal kicking something over, maybe a deer, but I didn't sleep much after that. By morning, the air was cool and a little damp. Nothing looked different. My car was untouched. The field was still empty. I shook it off and made breakfast on my camp stove, scrambled eggs and a strip of bacon. I walked around a bit, stretching my legs, then decided to hike over to the old barn down the hill. The barn was stranger up close. The wood was gray and cracked, and the roof had a soft sag to it. There was a faded sign near the door, something written in cursive that had worn away completely. Inside, it was mostly empty, just a dirt floor, some rotting planks, and a stack of crates in one corner. I looked through them. One had old glass jars with cloudy water, maybe preserves long gone bad. Another had rusted tools, scythes, a shovel, something that looked like a meat hook. It felt off. Not just abandoned, but almost staged, like someone had placed things there recently to make it look old. I left and didn't go back to the barn again. That afternoon, Clouds rolled in fast. I set up a tarp over the tent and checked the stakes. Around 5, it started raining. Not hard, but steady enough to force me into the tent for most of the evening. The sound of rain on nylon is usually soothing. This time, it wasn't. It just gave the feeling that something could be outside, and I wouldn't know until it was too late. Just before it got dark, I heard movement in the distance. Slow, heavy steps through wet grass. I unzipped the flap an inch and looked out. I saw a figure about 50 yards away. It was a man, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing dark clothing, maybe a jacket or coveralls. He wasn't walking toward me. He was standing still, looking in my direction. His posture didn't change. He just stood there, half hidden by the tall grass. I ducked back inside and zipped the tent shut. My heart started pounding. I reached for the knife I kept near my bag. Not a big one, just a folding blade I used for food prep and cutting rope. I held it in my hand and sat in the dark, listening. The rain kept coming. I didn't hear footsteps anymore. After maybe an hour, I peeked again. The man was gone. I didn't sleep that night at all. I kept the knife in my hand, the zipper half open, my boots on. Every so often, I'd shine my flashlight outside. Nothing moved. No one spoke. Just that empty silence and the rain. By sunrise, I had made up my mind. I was leaving. I packed up fast, barely eating anything, rolled the tent wet, and stuffed everything into my bag. I hiked back to the car, checking behind me every few steps. Still nothing. I reached the car, tossed everything in the trunk, and slid into the driver's seat. Then I saw it. Sitting on the hood of the car was a dead rabbit. Its neck was twisted, and there was no blood, just a clean break, as if someone had wrung it out like a towel. It hadn't been there yesterday. I would have noticed. Someone had left it there overnight. I looked around. Still no one in sight. I started the engine and reversed fast, bumping over the dirt trail. I didn't stop until I hit the main road, where I pulled over and finally took a breath. My hands were shaking. I looked back once. Nothing followed. I drove home in silence, the radio off, windows shut. When I got back to Pittsburgh, I took everything out of the trunk, checked it twice, then shoved it into storage. I didn't camp again that year. A few months later, I was still thinking about it. It nagged at me, not knowing if someone had just been messing with me or if I had stumbled onto something worse. I tried looking up old farm records from that area. I didn't have a name or address, but I remembered the roads I'd taken and the general direction. Eventually, I found something. The property I'd camped on had once belonged to a man named Vernon Hale. He'd run a small livestock operation in the early 90s, but stopped suddenly around 2003. There wasn't much info after that. Just a few mentions of trespassing complaints, some hunters being warned away. No real charges, nothing formal. But there was one detail that stood out. In 2009, a local newspaper had run a small story, barely a paragraph, about a man being questioned after hikers found strange traps laid in a nearby forest. Homemade, crude, but effective. No charges were filed, and no names were confirmed. But a neighbor said the traps were on Hale's land. There were no follow-ups. I still don't know who that man was in the field. Maybe it was Vernon. Maybe it was someone else who'd taken over the land. Maybe it was just some drifter. But someone had known I was there. Someone had watched me. And someone had left a dead rabbit on my car like a message. After that, I didn't go camping alone anymore. Even now, almost 10 years later, I still think about that field, the rain, the way that man stood still in the grass without ever moving. I think about how quiet everything was, and how easy it would have been for me to disappear without anyone noticing. Sometimes, when I'm driving through back roads or looking at satellite maps online, I find myself scanning for that barn, that ditch, that wire fence, but I've never found it again. And honestly, I'm not sure I want to. My name is Eric Tomlinson. This happened back in October of 2019, when I was 27 years old. I had just taken a week off from work after wrapping up a stressful 3-month contract for a data analytics firm in northern Michigan. I lived alone in Traverse City, and I didn't really feel like spending my time off just watching TV or scrolling through my phone. So I planned a solo camping trip to clear my head, but not to just any forest or lake like most people do. I don't know what got into me exactly, but I had this idea stuck in my head for a while, camping in a graveyard. Not right next to the headstones or anything, but up on a hill just behind one where the woods started. The graveyard was called Long Pine Cemetery, an old plot about 30 minutes outside of Alpena, tucked away near some county back roads. It wasn't used much anymore. Last time anyone was buried there was in the late 80s, I think. I had passed it a few times when I used to take long drives through the countryside just to get away. It sat by itself, quiet, no houses nearby, just surrounded by trees on all sides. Something about how remote it was made it seem perfect for being alone. I parked my car on a grassy pull-off just across from the iron gate. There wasn't much of a parking lot, just a little dirt and gravel patch next to the road. I got out and walked around the edge of the gate, backpack and gear slung over my shoulders, and followed a rough trail that led up the hill behind the cemetery. It was mid-afternoon by then. Cold wind, scattered clouds, lots of dry leaves crunching under my boots. The trees were turning, yellows and oranges everywhere, especially up the slope. I hiked for about 15 minutes until I found a flat clearing at the top. From there, I could see through the trees down into the graveyard, but not clearly. It was like a faint gray shape through the branches. I figured this was good enough. Not technically camping in the graveyard, just near it. I set up my small dome tent and rolled out my sleeping bag. There were no signs of anyone being up there recently. No trash, no footprints, no fire pit. Nothing. Just the scattered pine needles and dry oak leaves. That's what I liked. Just silence. Real silence. I sat there for a while, eating a granola bar, sipping from my water bottle, watching the wind roll over the tops of the trees. I could hear a hawk somewhere above. Then I pulled out a paperback I had stuffed in my bag, something I had read before but brought for comfort. I read for a bit until the sun started to dip lower behind the treetops. It got cold fast after that. That's when I built a small fire in a makeshift ring of rocks I found nearby. I had brought some firewood, but mostly I used the dead sticks and branches scattered around. Crackled nicely. I felt warm, alive, but it didn't last long. Around 8:30, I heard something weird. A rustling, not wind, not a squirrel or raccoon. Heavier. I looked up from where I was sitting, and it stopped. I thought maybe it was a deer. I turned off my flashlight to try to let my eyes adjust. Sat still. Waited. Nothing. Just that dry fall silence and my fire crackling beside me. Then about 15 minutes later, more sounds. This time closer. Lower down the hill. I stood up and held the flashlight, not turning it on yet. I figured if it was an animal, the light would just scare it. But what I heard next made me hold my breath. Footsteps. Actual footsteps. Not sprinting or running. Not stomping. Just slow, careful, almost creeping footsteps. On the leaves. Dry, scattered steps like someone trying to move without making noise but failing at it. It was coming from down the hill, toward the cemetery. I stepped back toward the fire, slowly, heart starting to race. My body felt stiff. I didn't say anything, didn't even whisper to myself. I just stood there trying to listen. More steps, still slow. Then they stopped. Everything was still again for a few seconds. And then a loud crack, like a branch being stepped on or broken in half, echoed up through the woods. I jumped. I spun around, sweeping the flashlight beam across the trees. Nothing, just trunks, brush, and darkness beyond the reach of the light. I moved the beam down the hill. Still nothing. My fire hissed and popped behind me. I was breathing heavier now. My heart thudded like a drum inside my chest. I knew I was alone up there. There were no campsites, no parking lots, no houses, nothing for miles. No one would hike up there that time of night for no reason. I told myself it had to be some animal, maybe a buck or a pair of them, but I wasn't sure. Eventually, I sat back down, legs trembling a little. I let the fire burn lower and didn't rebuild it. I just waited, flashlight in my lap. I didn't want to go down in the dark. I figured if I stayed put and quiet, whatever it was would move on. I tried to sleep, but I couldn't. I lay in the sleeping bag with my knife in one hand and my flashlight in the other. I kept thinking I was hearing movement, little snapping twigs, faint rustling. My mind kept going back to those footsteps. Eventually, I must have drifted off for a bit. When I woke up, it was maybe around 3 or 4 in the morning. Still pitch dark, cold. My hands were stiff. I turned on the flashlight and unzipped the tent slowly. I don't know what made me do it, but I stepped outside to check around. That's when I saw something. At the edge of the trees, maybe 20 feet away, someone had piled up a few rocks. 4 or 5 of them in a little stack that hadn't been there the day before. I had walked around that area collecting sticks. There's no way I would have missed it. I walked toward it slowly, shining the light. They weren't just random rocks. Someone had placed them there, on purpose, carefully, like a marker or something. I turned around, scanning the trees, heart racing all over again. There was no one, but someone had been there. I didn't want to stick around to find out more. I packed up everything fast. No food, no repacking properly. I just stuffed my gear, kicked dirt over the fire pit, and got out. I didn't even go down the way I came. I bushwhacked around the hill, moving fast, nearly slipping a few times. My boots were soaked in cold dew. I got scratched up by branches. Finally, I hit the road and jogged back to my car. When I got home later that morning, I locked everything up tight, took a long shower, didn't tell anyone, just sat there in silence for a while. I didn't go back to Long Pine Cemetery again, ever. I didn't even drive by it anymore. I looked it up online a few times, but there wasn't anything about weird stuff happening there. Just a regular, mostly forgotten graveyard. A couple weeks later, I found something even stranger. I had thrown my backpack in the garage and hadn't touched it since that night. When I finally went through it to clean it out, I found something tucked inside one of the side pockets. A smooth, flat stone. It had a small symbol scratched into it, just a faint mark, almost like a triangle with a line through it. I didn't put it there. I burned the bag, threw the rest of the gear out. I never camped alone again, and if I see a graveyard now, I look the other way. I don't care how old it is or how peaceful it looks. I learned my lesson. That place wasn't haunted. There weren't any ghosts, but someone else was up there that night. Someone who didn't want to be seen. And maybe I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. But the way I see it, if I hadn't woken up when I did, or if I hadn't seen that little rock stack, I might have stayed until morning. And maybe I wouldn't have made it back down that hill at all. I was 32 that year. My name is Jordan, and I'd just gone through a breakup that left me feeling like I needed to hit reset. I didn't want to be around people. I didn't want to talk or hear anyone talk. So I packed up my old pickup truck, bought a couple of supplies from a hardware store in Billings, Montana, and drove out to the Beartooth Mountains. I'd been there once before with some friends a few years earlier, and I remembered how quiet it was. Back then, I'd wished I could have stayed behind when we left. This time, I didn't tell anyone exactly where I was going. I just said I'd be gone for a few days and needed time off. I worked remotely for a small data company, and nobody really paid much attention to when or where I worked as long as things got done. I arrived near a small dirt trail on a Wednesday morning. It was already warm, sun hanging just above the horizon. My plan was to hike about 4 miles deeper into the tree line where fewer people camped. I liked the idea of being truly alone. No other campers nearby, no noise but wind and my own steps. I parked off a logging road, one of those narrow gravel roads surrounded by tall pines and empty silence, and hiked with my pack strapped on tight. I had my tent, sleeping bag, food for 5 days, a basic first aid kit, knife, flashlight, fire starting tools, and a revolver I always carried when hiking alone. I'd never used it, but it gave me peace of mind. The first few hours of hiking were smooth. I followed a game trail that eventually faded out into thicker woods. I had a topo map and a compass and had studied the terrain enough to know I was heading to a small valley just south of a ridge that held a lake. The lake wasn't on most public maps. It was one of those places people forgot about or skipped because the main trail didn't go there. When I got to the spot, I immediately felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Calm. The ground flattened out near a cluster of mossy boulders, and the tree cover opened up just enough to let the light through without roasting you. I set up my tent, collected deadwood, and built a small ring for a fire. The lake was about 300 yards away, just far enough to keep the mosquitoes down, but close enough to grab water when I needed. The first night was uneventful. I boiled water, ate a freeze-dried meal, and stared at the fire until it died down. The wind whistled a little, but not enough to spook me. I'd been in the woods enough to know what normal sounds were. By the time I zipped into my sleeping bag, the silence around me felt like a heavy blanket, and I slept better than I had in weeks. The next morning, I woke early and decided to explore around the lake. I carried my day pack, water, and the revolver. There were a few old animal trails, and I followed one that curved around the south side of the lake where the ground turned marshy. I noticed boot prints there, not fresh but not old either. The edges of the heel were still defined, probably a week old at most. Not a huge deal. This was public land, and I wasn't the first to wander this far off the trail. But there was something odd about the footprints. They didn't leave the way they came. It was like the person had walked along the bank, then vanished into the marsh. I looked around but didn't see any other prints leading away. Maybe they doubled back and stepped in the same tracks, I thought. By late afternoon, I was back at my camp. I cooked again, cleaned up, and sat by the fire. I didn't sleep as easily that night. Something about the footprints stuck in my head. On the third day, I decided to hike up a small hill behind the lake. From up there, you could see a wide stretch of the tree line to the west. The forest was thick, broken up by rocky outcroppings and dry creek beds. I scanned with my binoculars and noticed something unnatural. About half a mile away, tucked in the trees, was a man-made structure. It looked like a shed or maybe an old ranger station. The roof was tin, and the walls were either dark wood or stained metal. I hadn't seen it on any map. Curiosity got the better of me. I made my way toward it slowly, marking trees with strips of bright orange tape I brought with me so I could find my way back. The ground was uneven, and the trees grew tighter the deeper I went. It took me about an hour to reach the structure. It was a cabin, but not like any normal one. It was low to the ground, with no windows and only one door that had no handle, just a latch. The whole thing looked like it hadn't been built by any park service or forestry department. No signs, no markers, nothing official. I walked around the side and found a few things that made my stomach tighten. There were animal bones piled near a log. Mostly deer or elk, but clean, bleached, like they'd been there a long time. Behind the building, there was a shallow pit in the ground with blackened ash and scraps of metal, old cans, burned cloth, melted plastic. A campfire, but too close to the cabin for my liking. I didn't try the door. I didn't want to know what was inside. Something about it felt wrong, like I wasn't supposed to be there. I backed away and returned the way I came, checking for my orange tape strips every few trees. Back at my camp, I didn't feel calm anymore. That peace I had the first night was gone, replaced by a low buzz in the back of my skull. I stayed up later than usual, keeping the fire going longer. I didn't hear anything strange, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. That night, I dreamed of boots in the mud. Nothing else, just footsteps that stopped and went nowhere. On the fourth morning, I almost packed up and left, but I was stubborn, and I'd only planned for 5 days. I told myself the structure was probably an old trapper's cabin or a ranger outpost no longer in use. Nothing strange about that. Still, I didn't explore that day. I stayed close to camp, gathering more wood than I needed and pacing a lot. In the late afternoon, I heard a sound I hadn't heard all week. A branch snapped, not far away. Not the kind of snap caused by wind or a falling limb. This was the sharp, sudden sound of something stepping on it. I froze. My fire was out. I'd been waiting to light it until the sun got lower. I crouched and scanned the trees to the east, where the sound came from. I waited 10 minutes. Nothing. Then I heard it again. Closer. 2 steps. Then silence. I pulled my revolver from the bag and stepped behind a tree. I waited there for what felt like an hour. Nothing moved. Not a squirrel, not a bird. The woods had gone still. That's what scared me most. Eventually, I made a loud noise, stomped and clapped, and shouted into the woods. No answer. Nothing moved. I lit my fire early and kept it high until after midnight. The last night, I didn't sleep at all. I sat up in my sleeping bag, revolver in hand, listening. Just before dawn, I heard what sounded like footsteps again, but this time moving away from camp. When the sun came up, I packed everything in under 15 minutes and got out of there. I didn't stop until I reached my truck. The whole way back, I kept looking behind me, convinced someone was walking the same trail a few hundred yards back. When I finally reached the gravel road, my legs were shaking. I threw my pack in the bed and drove without checking the rearview mirror. I never reported what I found. I didn't see a crime. I didn't see a person. I didn't find any bodies or evidence of anything illegal. Just a weird, hidden cabin and some strange signs around it. But the feeling I had out there, being watched, followed, listened to, that stayed with me long after I left. A month later, I looked up land records for that area. The spot where the cabin sat wasn't on any current property maps. No one owned it. No leases. Nothing listed. When I searched deeper, I found an old file from the 1970s about a hunter who went missing near that ridge. Never found. Last known location was the south end of the lake. I haven't been back since, and I won't. It was September 2021 when I decided to take some time off work. My wife, Allison, had been asking about doing a real camping trip for months. Not the kind where you park the car right next to the campsite and still hear people laughing 2 tents over. She wanted the real deal. Silence. Nature. Just the two of us. I wanted that too. We'd both been burnt out. Me from long hours at the plant, her from bouncing between freelance clients on her laptop. I thought a break would be good for both of us. I was 33. She was 31. We were married 6 years by then. No kids. No drama. We'd been hiking a lot around our town in Idaho, but never did a deep wilderness trip. So I started looking up spots in Montana. Quiet, isolated areas without any of the usual foot traffic. I came across a post in an old camping forum about a place called Burnt Ridge in the Kootenai National Forest. The guy who wrote it made it sound like a dream. Deep woods, no marked trails, and about 6 miles of off-grid walking from the nearest dirt road. He said the spot overlooked a creek that ran between 2 steep hillsides, and the only way in or out was down a narrow game trail. I should have paid more attention to how he also mentioned he'd never seen another soul out there in 2 trips. We left on a Thursday morning in mid-September. Weather was perfect, cool mornings, warm afternoons. Clear skies. We drove up from Bonner's Ferry and cut off onto a dirt road just past Yock. That road stretched on for a while, twisting through deep woods until it finally ended near a small turnout. We left the car there, packed up our gear, and headed into the forest. I had everything we needed: 2 heavy-duty packs, a bare canister for food, water filtration kit, satellite phone, GPS, tent, sleeping bags, my old hunting knife, bear spray, a flare gun, and even a small folding saw. I wasn't carrying a gun because the rangers didn't allow them in that section. I wasn't too worried anyway. I knew there were grizzlies in the area, but we made enough noise while hiking that I figured they'd stay away. The trail down to the creek was barely there. Just a narrow, beaten path maybe a foot wide that dipped between tree roots and jagged rocks. Took us close to 2 hours to make it down, and when we got to the bottom, I saw why the guy online raved about it. The creek was maybe 20 feet wide, running clear and cold between tall grass and brush. Pines rose straight up the hills on both sides, and the only sounds were water trickling and birds calling. We pitched the tent on a small patch of flat dirt maybe 50 feet from the creek, under a stand of pines. It was beautiful, exactly what we'd hoped for. That first night was peaceful. We made a small fire, ate dehydrated food, then sat back and watched the stars. No clouds, no light pollution, just a million stars above us, crisp and sharp. We slept well. The air was cool but not cold, and there was something relaxing about being that far away from everything. The second day, we hiked upstream a bit, looking for animal tracks. We saw signs of deer, elk, and maybe even moose. We collected firewood, filtered more water, and just enjoyed the quiet. Allison wrote in her little journal while I cleaned up the site. We talked about coming back again in the spring or maybe even winter, though I had my doubts about snow camping. It was that third night when things changed. We were both asleep when I woke up to the sound of twigs snapping outside the tent. I figured it might have been a deer or even a raccoon nosing around. I checked the time, it was just after 2 a.m. I didn't want to spook Allison, so I stayed still and listened. I could hear breathing, not animal-like. It was faint but steady, almost like someone trying not to make noise. Every few seconds, I'd hear the soft crunch of leaves or another twig pop. Whatever it was moving slow. I unzipped the side of the tent as quietly as I could and looked out. The fire had burned down to glowing red embers. I couldn't see much, just shadows of trees and faint moonlight reflecting off the creek. Nothing moved, no eyes staring back, but I could still hear it, off to the left, near the brush. The breathing, it was too long and slow for an animal. I knew that much. I stayed there, half out of the tent, clutching the bear spray in one hand and a flashlight in the other. I waited nearly 10 minutes before the sound finally stopped. I didn't go back to sleep that night. The next morning, Allison could tell I hadn't slept. I didn't want to scare her, so I said I'd heard a coyote or something and stayed up just in case. We ate breakfast quietly. I felt off. Something about the way the breathing sounded. It had this human rhythm to it, inhale, hold, exhale. Stuck in my head. We spent the day hiking downstream. I tried to enjoy it, but I kept checking behind us. Every sound felt too close. Every squirrel running through the underbrush felt bigger than it should have. Allison didn't seem bothered, so I kept it to myself. That night, we built the fire bigger and stayed up a little longer. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I kept scanning the tree line while Allison read. I even walked the perimeter of our camp a couple times before we zipped up the tent and went to bed. I didn't sleep at all that night. Around 3 a.m., the breathing came back. This time, it was closer. I could hear soft footsteps, not crunching leaves, but pressing down slowly like someone carefully moving over dirt and pine needles. It circled our tent. I could hear it on all sides, one step at a time, slow and deliberate. I held the flare gun in one hand, bear spray in the other, and stayed still. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it would wake Allison. I didn't open the tent flap. I didn't make a sound. And then it stopped, dead quiet. That morning, I stepped outside as the sun came up. There were prints, not animal. Boots, not fresh but not old either. A few were partly smudged, but I could tell by the shape, heel, arch, toe. Someone had walked through our site. A single person, from what I could see. The prints circled the tent once, then led back toward the trail going up the hill. Allison asked if I was okay, and I told her we had to leave. I said a storm might be coming in or that we needed to check on something back in town. I don't think she believed me, but she packed her stuff without arguing. We hiked up the same narrow path we came down on. Felt longer going up, harder. I kept stopping to listen, but I didn't hear anything out of place. No footsteps, no breathing, just the wind and the occasional rustle from the woods. We made it back to the car by late afternoon. I didn't say much on the drive back to town. Allison finally asked me what was wrong when we stopped for gas outside of Troy. I told her everything. The breathing, the prints, the circling. Her face changed. She didn't say anything, but I could see the fear settle in. When we got home, I reported what happened to the local ranger station. They didn't take it too seriously, said it was probably another camper or a hunter. But the area we'd been in wasn't near any marked trails. And the guy online said he'd never seen another soul out there. A few weeks later, I went back online to that forum where I first read about Burnt Ridge. The original post was gone, deleted. The user's account had been scrubbed too. I never found out who was out there with us. I didn't need to. I knew what I heard. I knew what I saw. Someone followed us into those woods, watched us sleep, circled our tent for 2 nights. And whoever it was didn't want to be seen. They waited until we were asleep. They moved slow, deliberate. They weren't lost. They weren't hiking. They were hunting something or watching. We haven't gone camping since. Not deep woods off-grid like that. Allison doesn't even like going near the forest now. And I don't blame her. That trip changed something in me. I used to feel calm in nature. Now I feel exposed. I think about the way the breathing sounded right outside the tent. How I never saw a face, but I knew someone was there. And the worst part is knowing we were lucky, because whoever it was, they let us leave. I was 34 when I decided to take some time off work and head out to the mountains in Montana. It was June of 2021. I had been working remotely ever since the pandemic started, and I felt like my brain was cooked from sitting in the same chair day after day. I wanted to just get out, breathe actual air, move my legs, and not hear anything man-made for a while. I'd always liked being alone outside. I used to go camping when I was younger, mostly with my dad. After he passed a few years ago, I stopped doing it for a bit, but I felt like I needed it again. I still had all my gear: tent, backpack, stove, water filter, first aid, even bear spray. I'd updated a few things over the years, mostly lighter stuff, but everything still worked. I loaded up my car and drove out to an area I hadn't been to before, near a place called Eagle Ridge, just outside a small town called Marion. The area was remote. No cell service past a certain point. I had to take 2 forest roads just to get close to the trailhead, and even that wasn't much more than a dirt pull-off. There were no other cars around when I parked. That was the whole point. I was planning to hike in about 7 miles to this flat patch of land near a stream. I'd seen it marked on some topo maps. There wasn't an official trail going to it, but there were enough game paths and clearings to make it doable. I wanted to stay out for 4 days, hike in, set up camp, explore a little each day, and then head back. The first day went smooth. Weather was clear, mid-70s, just warm enough to sweat a little while moving but cool in the shade. I passed a few old elk beds and saw a few white-tailed deer sprinting off. Around mile 4, I crossed a shallow creek, took off my boots, and soaked my feet for a while. The water was freezing, and it felt incredible. I hadn't felt that calm in a long time. I got to the spot around 4 p.m. It was exactly like I'd hoped. A soft clearing surrounded by pines and firs, maybe 30 feet from a small creek that ran slow and steady over rocks. The area sloped gently upward to the east, eventually rising into a ridge maybe 200 or 300 feet higher. I could see it through gaps in the trees. The way the sun hit it in the afternoon gave it a red tint. No wonder people called it Eagle Ridge. It looked like a place you'd see one circling. I set up my tent, filtered some water, made a freeze-dried dinner, and sat back against a log. Felt good to just breathe and do nothing. When the sun dipped behind the ridge, the temperature dropped fast. I crawled into my sleeping bag around 9 and fell asleep quick. It was that second night when things started to get weird. I spent most of the second day hiking uphill, toward the ridge. I didn't go all the way up, just followed some trails that wound along the lower slope. Lots of pine needles underfoot, tons of animal sign. I even found what looked like a small cave or overhang, just a dark patch cut into the side of a rock formation, half covered with roots. I didn't go inside. It looked shallow, probably just some small animal den. I marked the spot in my GPS and headed back down before it got too late. That night, something woke me up. I didn't know what time it was at first. My phone was off and I wasn't wearing my watch. I just woke up suddenly, not from a dream, not from needing to pee, but from something else. I laid there in my bag, not moving, not even sure why I was awake. It was completely silent, not even wind, the kind of silence that presses on your ears. I strained to hear something, anything. Then I heard it, a short, sharp snapping sound, like a stick being stepped on. It came from somewhere down near the creek, maybe 30 feet away. I froze. It didn't repeat. There was nothing after it, just that one clear snap, then silence again. I stayed still for a long time, probably 10 minutes. Then I slowly unzipped my bag, grabbed the can of bear spray, and listened some more. Nothing. Eventually, I laid back down, still holding the canister. I didn't fall asleep for a long time. The next morning, I checked around the creek but didn't find anything unusual. A few raccoon prints in the mud, some deer tracks, but nothing that looked fresh or heavy. I told myself it was probably just an animal. A big one, maybe elk or moose, but it had sounded deliberate. That day, I stuck closer to camp. I walked maybe a mile upstream, collected more firewood, sharpened a stick just for peace of mind. Every once in a while, I'd stop and look toward the trees, not even sure what I expected to see. I stayed up later that night, let the fire burn low. I didn't feel right going to sleep too early. Not scared exactly, just on edge. I finally crawled into my tent around midnight. It was almost the exact same thing again. I was woken up by another sound. Only this time it wasn't a stick. It was a slow, dragging noise. Not loud, but long and steady, almost like something brushing against bark or being pulled through brush. Then silence again. Not even insects. I waited a long time. No movement, no voices, no other sounds. Eventually, I unzipped the tent and peered out with my flashlight. The beam cut through the dark, sweeping across trees, rocks, water. I saw nothing. I walked the edge of camp slowly, heart pounding. Still nothing. No footprints, no smell, just trees and cold air. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. That next day, I told myself I'd stay one more night, but I packed up some of my gear just in case. I had the feeling that I wasn't alone out there. Maybe some other hunter or camper was nearby. Maybe they were watching me for some reason. Or maybe it was someone passing through. I didn't know, and that was the part that ate at me. I hiked back up toward the ridge again. I didn't plan to. My legs just took me there. Something about the height made me feel safer, like I could look down and see if someone was moving below. I ended up sitting near that cave-like spot I'd found earlier. The dirt in front of it looked disturbed, more than before, like it had been recently dug at or walked over. I crouched down and brushed away some pine needles. There were boot prints, not huge ones, but not small either, adult-sized, and not mine. The pattern was different from mine, deeper too. Whoever it was had been standing right outside the overhang, maybe looking in, or maybe hiding. That was enough for me. I made my way back to camp fast and packed everything. I didn't care if it was getting late. I stuffed my gear, grabbed my bear spray, and started hiking back toward the car. I kept looking over my shoulder. Every gust of wind felt like something moving. I nearly tripped over a root when I thought I saw a shadow between trees, but it was nothing. I made it halfway back when I realized it would be dark soon. I didn't want to keep walking through the forest with no light. I found a flat spot, far off any game trail, tucked behind some thick brush, and set my tent up again. I didn't cook. I didn't even take off my boots. I just got inside and kept the bear spray next to my chest. I barely blinked all night. I didn't hear anything, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. I thought about the boot prints, about the dragging sound, about the silence. Something was off about all of it. I hiked the last 3 miles in the morning without stopping. My shirt was soaked through with sweat even though it was cold. When I saw my car, I almost cried. I opened the door, tossed everything inside, and peeled out without even taking off my pack. On the way home, I stopped at a gas station with service and called the ranger station nearby. I told them where I'd been, what I'd seen. They didn't say much, just that they'd send someone to check it out. A few weeks later, I got a call back. They told me they'd gone to the area and found signs that someone else had been living out there. Not just hiking, living. Makeshift shelters, buried food waste, even some torn up clothing. They didn't find the person, but they thought someone had been squatting deep in the forest for a long time, possibly months. I don't know if that person ever saw me, but I think they did. And I think that second night when I heard the dragging sound, they might have been closer than I'll ever know. I haven't been camping since, but I still think about Eagle Ridge, and I still wonder who was watching me from the trees. It was early October of 2016 when I decided to go camping alone for the weekend. I was 29 then, living in a small apartment just outside Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. I'd been working long shifts in construction for months without a break, and the pressure had been building. My back hurt all the time. My sleep was garbage. My mind felt overloaded. I didn't want to talk to anyone. I didn't want to sit in traffic, and I didn't want to be near a city. I just wanted to go somewhere quiet with no signal, no people, and no deadlines. There was a state forest a few hours north around Lycoming County. Not a big-name park. Not one of those trendy spots that's full of vans and tents and hammocks hanging off every other tree. Just acres and acres of rugged forest, old logging roads, and scattered primitive campsites. I'd been there once before with my cousin years ago. It was the kind of place where you might not see another person all weekend. That was exactly what I wanted. I left early on a Friday morning. The weather had looked fine all week, and I didn't pay much attention to the forecast. I just loaded my gear into the back of my beat-up pickup: tent, sleeping bag, camp stove, cooler, extra clothes, and a .40 cal pistol I always carried when camping solo. I wasn't worried about bears. People were more unpredictable. By noon, I was deep into the woods, driving slow along a muddy, narrow road that used to be a logging trail. It had rained recently, and the ruts were deep. My truck bounced and groaned, tires slipping a little in the mud. I passed an old trail marker nailed to a tree, the wood so faded it looked like it had been there for decades. I pulled off into a clearing where I remembered there being a flat, dry spot near a creek. The creek was louder than I expected, fast-moving from the recent rain, but the spot looked good. No trash, no boot prints, just trees and moss and water. I parked the truck on higher ground and walked the area to make sure it hadn't flooded. It looked fine. I set up camp slowly, enjoying the quiet. Tent went up smooth. I laid out a tarp underneath, then unrolled my sleeping bag inside. I cracked open a can of beer and sat on a folding chair near the creek, just watching the water. I stayed like that for hours, not really thinking about anything. My phone had no signal and I turned it off completely. Around dusk, the clouds started to roll in, thick and gray, moving fast. Started raining late that night. A steady, cold drizzle tapping against the tent. I had drywood packed up, so I managed to get a fire going under a makeshift tarp, just enough to cook some food and warm up. I ate in silence, listening to the rain hit the leaves. It wasn't peaceful exactly, but it was better than being home. Better than dealing with people. The rain got heavier after midnight. I was inside the tent by then, zipped up in the bag, listening to the sounds of the storm. Rain on nylon, wind in the branches, occasional thumps from the woods, pine cones or branches falling. I wasn't worried. The forest was alive with sounds. You learn not to jump at every one. I didn't sleep great. The ground was cold and uneven. My back ached. Around 3 a.m., I got up to take a leak. I stepped out barefoot onto the tarp and stood in the rain, shivering, trying to keep my balance on the slippery ground. The woods looked like black walls on all sides. My headlamp barely pierced the dark. I finished up and crawled back in. Saturday was cold and wet. I made some coffee under the tarp and tried to stay dry, but the rain didn't stop. I spent most of the day inside the tent, reading an old paperback, eating jerky and crackers, trying not to think about work or bills or anything. Around late afternoon, I finally decided to hike up the hill behind the campsite, just to move around. I followed a barely visible game trail up through thick undergrowth, soaked to the bone within minutes. The ground was slick with wet leaves. I slipped more than once. About half a mile up, I found an old tree stand nailed to a rotting pine. It looked ancient. I didn't climb it, wouldn't trust it, but it meant someone hunted around here at least years ago. On the way back down, I spotted something odd, tire tracks in the mud. Faint, but there. Not mine. These weren't recent, but they weren't washed away either. Maybe a few days old. That didn't sit right. There weren't any other roads nearby. This road wasn't on any map. You had to know about it. I followed the tracks a little ways. They didn't go far, just off into another clearing, maybe 200 yards off the trail. At the edge of the clearing was a pile of debris. At first I thought it was just an old trash heap, but as I got closer, I saw it wasn't trash. It was personal stuff. A busted cooler, a couple of shredded sleeping bags, torn tarps, Rain had soaked everything. The fabric was discolored. There were cans scattered around, rusted through. Some old boots, one lying on its side, the other upright, both caked in mud. It looked abandoned, but not old enough to be forgotten. The boots still had laces. The sleeping bags weren't moldy, just torn and soaked, like someone had left in a hurry and never came back. I turned around and went straight back to my camp. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling. I kept thinking about those tracks, that pile of gear. Why would someone drive way out here, set up a camp, and just leave it to rot? Poured all night. My tent held up, but I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I thought I heard something. Twigs snapping, water splashing, something moving outside. I told myself it was animals, just deer or raccoons. But I kept the pistol unzipped in the sleeping bag, right next to me. Early Sunday morning, just after dawn, I got out to take a look around before packing up. The rain had stopped finally, but the whole forest dripped and steamed with fog. I walked the perimeter of the camp and noticed something that made my stomach turn. A single boot print in the mud, right at the edge of the clearing. Not mine. Too big, wider, heavier, pressed deep like someone had stood there watching. There were no others, just the one, like whoever made it had come up, paused, then turned around. I packed fast, real fast. Tent was soaked and filthy, but I crammed it into a trash bag, tossed everything into the truck bed without organizing it. I started the engine and got the hell out. The road out was worse than before. Mud was deep, and the tires kept sliding. I kept thinking I'd get stuck. Every minute I was afraid I'd see someone standing in the trees, watching. No phone signal still. I didn't stop. I finally reached the gravel county road after what felt like an hour. From there, I made it to the highway. I didn't relax until I was an hour from home. I never reported anything. What would I even say? That I found some old gear and maybe someone had been watching me? I didn't have a license plate, a name, nothing. But I never went back there again. Not even close. I still go camping, but not alone anymore. Not out in places where nobody else goes. I learned something on that trip. Not everything that happens in the woods can be explained. Not everything has a name. And sometimes the scariest thing out there isn't what you hear, it's what you don't. It's the silence when you expect a sound. The single boot print when there should be none. And the feeling that someone else was out there watching, just close enough to see you, just quiet enough to never be seen. I was 34 when I decided to take a solo camping trip out to northern Arkansas, somewhere just south of the Missouri border. It was May 2019, and I'd been living in Tulsa for a few years. Work had been stressful lately. Too many screens, too many emails, too much noise, and I just needed some real quiet. Not the kind where the AC hums and you can still hear cars in the distance. I wanted deep, thick, wooded quiet. I wanted to sleep outside, away from people, phones, and everything else. I'd picked a place after some map scanning and online poking around, Ozark National Forest, but way off the main trail past where any ranger station would be. I wasn't really supposed to be camping that far out. The clearing I picked wasn't even a marked site, but I figured no one would care, and I was careful. I wasn't littering or making giant fires. I had a small single-person tent, a bear-proof food canister, and just enough gear to last a few days. I drove out from Tulsa on a Thursday afternoon and hiked in from a gravel pull-off before sundown. I brought my backpacking pack, my boots, a knife, and a little emergency beacon just in case I twisted an ankle or something worse. It was just me. That first night was perfect. I barely slept, not from fear or anything, just excitement. The air smelled like pine and dirt and old water. I laid in the tent listening to cicadas and wind moving through the branches. The sky was so black it felt like space. I must have nodded off around 3 in the morning and woke up a little before 7. My body was sore, but it felt good. I made some coffee on the camp stove, walked around the clearing, and scouted for a better firewood spot. Just a quiet, easy morning. Around noon I hiked down toward a creek I'd seen on the topographic map. I brought my water filter and some snacks. I sat on a flat rock near the edge for a while, just watching the water slide over the stones. No sounds, no one else, no signs of other camps. Later that evening, I set up a small fire and cooked a freeze-dried meal. Sat on a rock near the flames, eating and watching the trees change color in the low sun. That was the second night. That night was when I started to feel something weird. Not panic, not even fear really, just a feeling that something was off. It started with a noise around 1 in the morning. I'd been asleep in the tent and woke up because I heard something snap, like a branch breaking, not far, maybe 15 or 20 feet from my tent. That wasn't totally unusual. I knew there were deer and raccoons out here, maybe even black bears, but it didn't sound like any of those things. It was heavier, slower. I stayed quiet. I didn't move or unzip the tent. I just laid there, eyes wide open, trying to listen. A few minutes passed, then another noise, 2 slow crunches of leaves, then silence again. My heart was pounding. I told myself it was a buck or something passing through, but the next morning I went out to check, and there were no hoof prints, nothing obvious. But near the edge of the clearing, where I'd heard the sounds, there was a branch that looked freshly snapped clean like someone grabbed it and broke it. I tried not to let it bother me. I didn't want to be that guy who gets spooked by his own imagination. I did my usual routine that day, made coffee, hiked a little further out, checked the map again, even marked some stuff with my GPS. But I kept thinking about that noise. Something wasn't sitting right with me. That night, I moved my tent a little closer to a rock wall that curved on the west side of the clearing. It gave me a little shelter and made me feel a bit safer. The woods were dead quiet after dark. Not even wind. That third night, around 2 in the morning, I woke up again. This time, it wasn't a branch snap. It was a sound like someone dragging something. Slow, rhythmic, like something heavy being pulled over the ground. My whole body tensed. I didn't breathe. I lay there frozen for probably 20 minutes. I heard nothing else. Just that one sound, and then nothing. Again, no scream, no crash, no definite sign of danger. But I was on edge now. I got out of the tent at first light and did a slow walk around the clearing again. I found something this time, about 20 yards from my tent. In a patch of soft soil under some moss, I found what looked like a heel print. Person's heel. Just one. It was faint, but too clean to ignore. I was the only one out here. There were no vehicles at the trailhead when I parked. No sign of anyone on the hike in. No voices, no trash. Nothing. Now I had a broken branch, a dragging noise, and a heel print. Still, I told myself it could have been old. Maybe a hunter from earlier in the season. Maybe it was mine. I tried to let it go, but I couldn't. Something was off, and I knew it. That afternoon, I packed up some of my stuff and hiked it halfway back to the trailhead. I left it hidden behind a deadfall. I figured if I had to leave in a hurry, it'd be lighter going. I only kept essentials, my stove, food for one more night, the emergency beacon, knife, and some water. I didn't plan to stay another night, but the sun was already starting to drop, and I didn't want to hike out in the dark, so I decided one more night. I barely slept. I was in the tent with the rain fly off, trying to fall asleep to the stars. I kept my knife close, tucked under my sleeping bag, and left my boots just outside the tent flap. I kept listening. My ears were working harder than my eyes. Sometime after midnight, I heard it again. The dragging, closer this time, louder, then a soft metallic click. I froze. Every muscle in my body locked. I had no idea what it was. Maybe something falling? Maybe a stick against a rock? But the rhythm didn't sound like nature. It sounded like someone trying to be quiet. I didn't move, just kept breathing shallow, trying to listen. Then I heard something that made my stomach drop. A zipper. A tent zipper. Not mine. Not that close, but close enough. There shouldn't have been any other tents. I hadn't seen any. I knew I was alone. I'd hiked far, and this wasn't a campsite. There was no one else out here. No voices, no fires, no flashlights. But someone, somewhere in the woods near me, had unzipped a tent. I sat up slowly. I put on my boots, didn't lace them, grabbed my knife. Then I opened the tent flap just a little and looked out. Total black. No movement. No moon. I waited. 10 minutes. Maybe more. Then I made a decision. I left everything but my knife and flashlight and started walking. Quiet. Slow. Away from camp. Toward the hidden pack I'd left earlier. Every 10 steps I stopped and listened. I didn't use the flashlight unless I absolutely had to. I walked like I was made of glass. I made it to the pack, dug out my headlamp and checked for movement. Still nothing. I waited until first light, sitting behind a tree, watching the direction I came from. At sunrise, I went back to camp. My tent was cut, a long, clean slash down one side. Not torn, not chewed, cut. My stove was gone. My food canister was open, but not dumped out. Just opened and placed a few feet from the tent. My extra boots were gone too. That's when I knew I wasn't imagining things. Someone had been watching me. I didn't wait. I packed what was left, took only what I needed, and hiked out. I didn't stop for water, didn't look back. When I got to the car, there was a note under the wiper. Just a torn piece of paper, folded once. It said, "You shouldn't camp alone." That was it. No name, no handwriting I recognized. I didn't report it. I didn't go to the ranger station or call anyone. I drove straight back to Tulsa, heart pounding, every turn of the road feeling like I was being followed. I still think about it sometimes, still wonder who was out there. A drifter? A hunter? Someone living off-grid? I don't know, but it was real. Not a ghost story, not a dream. I haven't camped alone since, and I don't plan to, ever.